All right. Welcome everyone to Women in the Military podcast. I'm really excited to be here with Silver today to talk about her time in the military, and I started following her on Twitter and she just has so many interesting insights. I thought it would make such a great episode. So, we'll talk about her time in the military, and then in a few months we'll get to hear a little bit more about ROTC and the work that she's doing there. So, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. I'm really excited. I am. I love your podcast. So this is legitimately like a huge dream. So I appreciate you bringing me on.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I was, like, nervous to reach out, and then on Twitter, you were so excited, so I was like, "Yay!" Or X.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did it again. I
X,
called it Twitter.
whatever.
It's hard to change a name. It's really
Yeah.
hard. So let's start with why did you decide to join the military?
Oh my gosh. So my story is a little funky. I think I was straight A student, for sport athlete, like very involved with school and grew up in a non-military family. None of my, in fact, non-college going family. And so I had this weird desire to do it in some way, shape, or form throughout high school. But the way I grew up was that was unfortunately treated as, if you have no other options, you go to the military, right? So it was in the back of my head. I ended up getting a scholarship, went off to Boise State University, and had actually walked by an ROTC building a few times, but still it was like, well, I don't know anything about the Army or military in general, but that desire was still there. So I did a year there, was no longer a 4.0 straight A student. I over socialized and really enjoyed my time there to a point where I didn't stay at Boise State anymore. And didn't really have, I didn't have a lot of options for paying for school anymore. So to be fully transparent, I actually joined the Army National Guard in Montana. Talked to the recruiter. He said, "What do your parents think?" I said, "They don't know, but I'm 19." So, and he said, "Come back in a week after you talk to your parents because we want you to have a support system." So, 7 days later, I came back after not telling my parents and went to MEPS and joined as a combat medic and finally told my parents a couple weeks later. And now they're the most proud Army parents in the whole world. But at the time, it was daunting. So yeah, I really just had this weird desire, and then it turned into I needed a way to pay for college. So yeah, I started enlisted, and then found an ROTC program in Montana that I wanted to go through. Went through basic AIT, came back, started ROTC, and here I am 14 years later.
Yeah. Well, that's a really cool story. I love that you're like he's like, "Go talk to your parents," and you're like, "Okie dokie," and then you come back and you're
Yeah,
like, "Did you talk to
we're
parents?"
good.
"Sure, sure I did."
Yeah. I hadn't been indoctrinated into the Army values quite yet on that whole integrity thing, but I knew that they would probably talk me out of it or really guilt me out of it. And I love my parents to this day. They're very proud of the work I've done. I can understand their thinking behind it, just with them not having any knowledge about the military and what opportunities it would afford me. And actually, my brother ended up joining while I was at AIT. Went to basic, had a deployment. We were in the same unit at one point, and it all worked out to where my whole family is very military friendly and proud now. So it's just
Yeah. Well,
uneducated, not a lot of information. So yeah.
for sure, yeah. I think there is, like, a lot of, like, not there's not especially 14 years ago, there was even less information, but there's not a lot of good information, and a lot of the bad stuff gets publicized and not the good, and so it makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
just
I mean,
having
this
that
was, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, just having that desire to serve is kinda interesting that you just felt pulled to join, and you were like, "And I don't wanna get talked out of it."
Yeah. That's a lot of it. I mean, it was circa 2008, 2009. So it was, the height of GWAT. And I think there was a lot more fear there. And I had started going to school to become a doctor. And so it just seemed like they assumed it would derail me, which it did in a way, but I derailed myself in my own socialization
Yeah.
in college. So it worked out really well. And I don't think my parents or my family or myself would change it for the world. So
So you enlisted and you went to basic training and AIT, and then you said when you came back, you started going to school and you did ROTC. Is that so?
yeah,
How did that
yep.
all work out?
So it was kind of weird. I did a semester before I shipped for basics. So there was about 6 months between enlisting and then actually going. Went to basic Fort Leonard Wood, was a 68 whiskey medic. So then I went down to Fort Sam, and I had kind of heard about ROTC. Somebody down at AIT had asked if, I'd ever been interested in it. I've always had kind of a leadership mind frame, and it was something that I'd always been called a natural leader. And so at the time, it seemed like, oh, this is the way I'm supposed to go. And then finding out the promotion rates for enlisted medics, like it was going to be tough in the Montana Guard. We don't have an actual medical unit necessarily. So just knowing that to make an impact or really do something in a leadership position was going to take me so long. If I'm going to go through a long time, I might as well come out an officer on the backside. So joined ROTC, had a tough ROTC experience. I ended up becoming a single mom during my sophomore to junior year. So had to take a year off, had to figure out how to finish, graduate, commission with an infant, do all the things as a mom, but finished that out after 3.5 years of painstaking time, and went off and actually did the dang thing. So
And was your cadre supportive in helping you figure all that out, or was it you on your own trying to figure it out?
To be fully transparent, I think I was the first pregnant cadet that this program had ever seen. This was 2011, so it was also, women in the military. It was already women in the officer corps, obviously combat. It was just, we were very short on women, and then you add in, what do we do with this? We've never seen it before. Obviously, you can't do PT, you can't do this, so you're out of the program. And I was on scholarship, so it was a situation where I just don't think people had the right answers because it hadn't happened before. So at first, I felt very unsupported. I think a lot of that was me translating the lack of support I felt I had between friends, some family. I felt very on my own. I had gone from, 3 years prior, this going to be a doctor, straight A student, has the world at her fingertips, to now a single broke mom who can't even finish college because she can't afford it. She can't do this. So I was very lost. I think I turned a lot of my own self-hatred and projected that onto, as you've talked about in your podcast, this imposter syndrome of, I don't belong here. I'm not able to finish this. And then also this rejection syndrome of everybody's out to get me. So at the time, if you'd asked me, I'd have said, absolutely not. I have no supportive cadre. I definitely didn't feel supported by my peers, and a lot of the trajectory of the rest of my career was based off of that. But I think at the end of the day, today, my APMS actually back then is one of my biggest mentors now. So I think I was able to finally relieve some of that through therapy over time, and really just some self-reflection, and say, okay, they were as supportive as they could be given the circumstances and their own education and understanding of the situation. So it was tough. I definitely felt, I get a little emotional thinking about it. I definitely felt like it was me and my daughter against the world. Like we had, if it wasn't for my dad, I felt like I probably wouldn't have made it.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense that it'd be emotional. It's a big, change and so many emotions. And I found that in a lot of the interviews that I've done is that a lot of times the recruiters or the, ROTC cadre, they don't know what the right answer is, and they don't even know that they're not helping because they're just so overwhelmed with all the other things they're doing, and they don't I've heard of people not being able to get joint spouse because the recruiter didn't do the paperwork correctly. But at first I was really angry, and then I learned when I talked to another recruiter, they're like, I wouldn't have known that you needed to do that paperwork. And I'm like, well, that's really important. Everybody should know that, but not everybody does. So
yeah, no, it definitely taught me to start digging in and finding out. I mean, I felt like my own advocate. Taught me right off the bat, very early in my career, to be an advocate for myself. But I went about it probably the completely wrong way. If you ask anybody back when I was in ROTC with, didn't have a great attitude, felt very alone. I have a picture of me doing Nightland Nav with my daughter on a Kelty on my back, like a baby carrier, because I was still expected to complete everything at the same, there was very little give. In fact, I got a negative spot report the morning that I didn't show up for PT because that was the morning I found out I was pregnant. And it never got like rescinded. It still stayed in there for me not showing up, but it was literally the morning I found out I was pregnant. It was just a mess. So there was one, when you speak of recruiter, the recruiting officer at the time was the one that had my back, that I truly felt like she jumped through hoops to find the right information, fight for me to stay in the program, was able to come up with scholarship money through a foundation fund for me to be able to complete it without any debt. So that was super helpful. I actually just ran into her a few weeks ago for the first time since I commissioned. Haven't seen her since I commissioned. And it was like so many emotions came out. My daughter was there with me, so she got to see my now 11-year-old, who the last time she had seen her was just a few months old. And so there's a lot. But if it weren't for her supporting me through the program and my dad supporting me watching my daughter so I could work and get to PT at 6 a.m., and I would not be where I am right now. So grateful for that support.
So you felt really alone, but you also had people helping you, but
Yeah.
I mean, still really challenging. Well,
Yeah.
that's such a like, it's just that I've done so many interviews, and I always am like, "Oh, there's so much more to, like, military and women in the military and just people's stories of, like, what their experience is." So, thank you for sharing that, because it can be easy to talk about, and it's so important that people hear about, like, all the things that people have to go through to just get in the military and to serve, and then you join the military and it gets even more complicated.
Yep, absolutely. There's hurdles around every corner that you don't really understand until you experience it or you're close to somebody that is experiencing it. So hopefully I'm taking a lot of those lessons learned and implementing it where I'm at now, but we'll see.
So then you commissioned, and what was that transition like to go from, college to being in the Army? And you're still in the National Guard, right?
I am. So that transition was actually incredibly frustrating because I'm in such a small, the Montana National Guard is large, but it's still, it's small, right? We don't have a lot of units. And I was a medic attached when I was enlisted to a military police company, to a specific platoon. And through my cadet time, they kept me with that platoon. And so I was still kind of acting as a medic and a cadet. And then when I commissioned, they actually commissioned me as the platoon leader of that same platoon. So that was actually super, super challenging. And I didn't realize how much it affected my leadership style until I was gone from there and had left that particular unit. But I spent my first 7 years of the military within the same platoon and company, at least in the same headquarters area, just because of how it worked out where they commissioned me into. So transition for me was hard because I went from being, weekend drill drinking buddies with my team leaders to now being their platoon leader. And that, if I could change one thing, it would have been where I would have been slotted after I commissioned. But so that was tough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really
That was
hard because
tough.
it's like one day you're hanging out, you're their peer, and then the next day you're the boss, and
Yeah.
like, and how do you deal with that in like a personal sense and then as a leadership, because you're coming in and they're like, "Oh, we knew her back when," and
Yeah.
now just because she has gold bars on, it doesn't change, but everything's changed, so that I could see that being really challenging.
That was, oh man, that's a lot of the stories that I tell my cadets, and like lessons learned come from those first couple of years, because it was hell, to be honest, torn up inside of how do I do this? One, when I was a cadet, I didn't really have very good mentorship, like from, again, back early 2010, 2011, had the SMP program itself wasn't very well done back then. And we've made huge strides in Montana to fix that. But back then I was still being a medic on the weekends, not really learning how to be a platoon leader. And then quite literally I commissioned, and the next weekend I was at drill as the platoon leader. And I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. I know no PLs knew what they were doing, but I also had this additional obstacle of, these are all my friends or not friends. There's also
Right?
that aspect too, people that weren't my friends. And how do I now balance this the next month? And in all reality, I think it's an almost impossible thing to do well. But I definitely did not do well with that. My PL time was rough, rough.
Yeah. I mean, that is really hard, and I like how you're like, "And there were some people who didn't like me," and so, like,
It
it's
was
not
so true.
so it adds, like, even more complexity to the whole thing, and then people are like, "Well, you're being a favorite because that's your friend," and, like, all that. So there's I mean, you could just go on and on with all the different challenges, and that's just from, like, me looking at an outsider barely knowing anything, and then if you dive even deeper, there's, like, these relationships and complexities and everything that would make it so hard. I mean, it's hard enough to be a platoon leader as a lieutenant when you're brand new, to the unit. I can't even imagine with all that, like, back
That
it's
was
just
Oh man, that was tough. I tried to go about it the right way. I thought, just like we all do, I thought I was doing the right things. But as I grew in my own leadership, realizing that, I'm thankful, very grateful for that time because it definitely taught me what not to do so I can carry that forward to teach people now. But oof, I owe a lot of apologies to a lot of people in that unit just for not knowing any better, but really just thinking without doing a little bit more work on myself. So
yeah.
yeah.
So where did you go after that, job?
So I was there for a while. I actually, again, went from platoon leader, went to Bullock, came back from Bullock, and became the XO a few months later. And the headquarters and the platoon I was in charge of were in the same location. So I was still up in the High Line, middle of nowhere, Montana, now just coming back with the black bar on as the executive officer. So I stayed there until 2016. So for 2 years, just over 2 years or so. Actually, I switched in 2017, excuse me. So for 3 years, I was in that same unit still. So 8 years total at that point. And then I moved to another detachment. I was military police, so that's my branch. Switched over to another smaller law and order detachment a few hours away. And I was there until 2021, 2022. Yeah, 2022. Oh my gosh. So I was there for about 5 years also, but I became law enforcement operations officer and then was eventually selected for command over there. So that was my
And
trajectory.
and COVID happened during that time, so what was that experience
Eh,
like?
yeah, Amanda, that's a great question. So we're in Montana, right? So we kind of understand that Montana didn't take it in the same way as other states did, if you will. However, I actually was working full time as a tech in charge of all the like MOB stuff. So I was the MOB training officer, OIC, making sure we were getting all these units ready to deploy during that time. And we got sent home. And this is actually a really interesting time in my life. My husband was deployed. He is retired now, but he was deployed at the time. I was a full time student, actually finishing my bachelor's because I commissioned without actually finishing it in command with two toddlers and a 7, 8 year old at the time. So COVID then hit. We all got sent home. I then became a teacher on top of all of this other stuff I was trying to balance with my life. And hopefully it's okay to talk about it, but I had a complete and total mental break, just quite literal mental crisis. I'd been in command for 5 months at the time when I had it. Ended up moving in with my mother-in-law and father-in-law, who were absolutely wonderful. My kids were out of school. Well, my only school-age kid was out of school. My two toddlers, we just up and moved 2 hours away, lived with them for a couple of months while I could get stabilized on medication, and was diagnosed with some severe anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, some other stuff that had happened. So I was also trying to command a unit at the same time. And because I try to be out of the box and trying to think through a lot of things, we actually continued drilling. So we took 1 month off that was forced on us, like no drill, and then had to implement some serious safety mitigations to keep our unit training because we were NOSed for a deployment the next year. So it was really hard. I couldn't drive. I couldn't get behind the wheel of a vehicle. I could barely change my son's diaper without having some sort of a panic attack. And throughout, some therapy and medication, which I'm very open about now, as mental health and my own severe crisis, kind of got through COVID. And my husband eventually came back. His deployment got extended. Thank you, COVID. So he got stuck over there while all that was happening. And Then we got mobilized for the inauguration in 2021. So my unit had no choice but to really be training and prepared for that. So
Yeah.
it was crazy. I mean, military police, we were put on like kind of a standby for Minneapolis riots, and then we were put on standby and then actually mobilized for President Biden's inauguration in 2021. And we were already preparing for a deployment in August of 2020 or October of 2021. So there was really no stopping for our unit. It was
Yeah.
very high op tempo in a very stressful time of life.
Yeah. No, I think it's so important to talk about mental health. I struggle with PTSD, and so I've talked about my experience with that. And I mean, medication is there for a reason to help people, and there's no shame. I think it's important to talk about that because I mean, you need to get help when you need to get help, and like if therapy is how you get help, or therapy and medication, or whatever it is to get you back to where you need to be, like, that's what you need to do. Just like if you got sick with another ailment, you wouldn't say, "Oh, just, do go for a run." Feel like, no, take the medication, get better, and then, so you can keep functioning and keep living your best life. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's super important because we, as women in the military, for the most part, statistically, we are what they call high performers, right? Or it used to be overachievers, but we're just high performers, high functioning stress addicts is all we are, where we tend to just throw so much stuff on our plate. And if there's anything I can caution people, it's don't do what I did and wait until you physically and mentally. I mean, it my mental stress had been building for years, but it got to the point where I physically could not function. And I should have sought help a lot earlier. I should have, I mean, the signs were there forever, but I just was go, 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 go all the time, which I recently found out is also part of my ADHD. So it was just compounding onto itself. But we can't survive, we can't sustain ourselves like that for that long without something breaking. And when mine broke, I was a terrible mom, I was a terrible commander, I was a terrible worker, I was a terrible student. Like I could not handle all of it. So
yeah.
once you start feeling that way, preventative mental health is super important, but not waiting until it was almost too late. I mean, I was definitely in the, suicidal type thoughts at that point, and I wish I'd have sought help sooner.
Yeah. I think it's true, like, getting help, it's so easy to just be like, "Oh, I'm fine, it's not that big a deal," or compare yourself with someone else and be like, "They look like they're functioning," but you only know, like, what you see on the surface, and
Yeah.
it took me a long time to get help, and, I still struggle, and I have, a lot of tools now when I'm struggling instead of before where I would just, like, spiral out of control, and so, mental health, so important, so thank you so much for talking about
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. No,
Yeah,
and thank you. I'm glad you were able to get help too. It's the more of us that talk about it, the more people just know it's okay. There's nothing wrong. The highlight reels are not real. Social
right.
media is not real. There's real stuff. Everybody's got stuff going on. There's no shame in that. So
Yeah, and then talking about COVID and, like, the mission, and I think sometimes people don't think about, like, all the things the military is doing, like, you see it, but then you also don't see it, especially if you're not connected. I feel like stuff shows up into, like, my Facebook feed, and my mom's like, "What are you talking about?" It was like when Miss America won, she's like, "Did you know that she's a veteran or that she's serving active duty?" I was like, "Yes, that's all my Facebook feed is." Like, I know. I've seen it everywhere, and, like, she just happened to see something, or I told her I was like, "Yeah, I've seen it, it's everywhere." But so it's interesting how, like, those things are different, but just like, my husband was doing a job where they had to keep going in, and they just like you, they did all these preventative measures. They had, like, weird op hours where, like, half the people worked in the afternoon and half worked in the morning, so there'd be less people in the building, and there was, like, all this stuff that had to keep happening because, like, the mission continued. The
yeah,
work didn't stop, and some people can do work from home, and I think that's great, but then there's a lot of people, that had to continue to work, and I think a lot of people there was, like, this push-pull. My friend's husband had to continue working, and, like, everybody on her street, their husbands were home, and she's not military, she's civilian, but she was like, everyone was like, "This is so great. My husband's home. We have all this family time." And she felt so alone and isolated because that
Yeah.
wasn't her reality. Her husband had to keep going to work because the work he did, he had to do in person, and it was related to the military, so it was a mission, even though he was civilian. And I think there was, like, 2 different, like, people whose, like, everything stopped and they were all together and they got a bunch of family time, and then people who the mission had to continue or their job had to continue, and it was really, really challenging.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. That was the roughest and most growth filled few months of my life. Just like you said, yeah, I was already alone. I had work to keep me distracted from my husband. He left in October of 2019. So he'd already been gone for a few months. My youngest was 4 months when he left, and my oldest had just turned 2. So I guess they were about 6 months and 2. And so I still had 2 nursing toddlers. I'm a one woman show at that
Right.
point. And then all of that hit, and it was just now I'm also a teacher, and now I'm the daycare provider, and like we have nothing. So that was,
Yeah.
yeah, COVID was rough. And I am so thankful and grateful for my in-laws that just welcomed us in and let me just, like I said, stabilize and figure my stuff out in time to take everything forward and move forward before my husband got home. So that was
Yeah.
that was nice. But you're absolutely right. It was very isolating. And we're already isolated enough up here in Montana. Like
Right.
you add 3 young children to an already just overwhelmed mother. Oh.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's so much. Yeah, and someone I knew, her husband deployed, like, right at the beginning of 2020, and he was on a year deployment, and, like, he didn't get to come home for R&R, he didn't get,
Mhm.
like, any of those, so there was, like, that added. It was not just they were gone, but they, like, were gone, and they didn't come back until, like, they were done with their tour, and it was just yeah, so much
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah, I'm glad that's gone. I'm glad that's in the past. I'm glad my
Me
husband's
too.
retired and I don't have to worry about his deployments anymore. Like he is full beard, long hair, he's a stay-at-home dad right now and
Oh, that's
makes this
awesome.
all possible for me. So I'm grateful. He's paying it back tenfold now.
Perfect, that's awesome. That's awesome. I love that he got out and he's like, "I'm staying at home with the kids, supporting
Yep.
you." That's a great
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
So, okay, so after that, is that when you moved into the ROTC role, or was there another job before that?
Yeah. Nope, that was it. I did 3.5 years of command. I actually extended to go on the deployment. They kind of gave me we understand if you and your husband, I got to say, the Montana National Guard's leadership was fantastic during that time because while he was deployed, we got our NOS that we were deploying. And my BC sat down with me and just said, "Hey, Silver, like your husband's deployed now. You're not going to get much time together. You're going to high five and be off. We understand if you don't want to do that. We understand that's not good for your family. We don't want to be doing that to families." And he gave me some time to think about it. And I just went, you didn't offer the same thing to my husband. You probably wouldn't. And I was taking it from is it because I'm a woman, which is I've moved away from that mindset that they really were just trying to take care of my family. But I also had been with this unit and done so much with them and was in my dream position that I was fine with extending to do a deployment with them. So this is my time. I'm gonna have to deploy at some point anyway, most likely. So let's do this. And took that during that deployment. Backtracking my entire time from leaving ROTC, I've had this dream of someday working in ROTC, but as a National Guardsman, there's very few positions, especially for officers. There's only 3 in the whole state, so they're hard to get. And I knew that while I was deployed, when the position opened, I actually saw it and I went, well, that's not going to work because it's in Missoula, which is 2 hours away from where my family lives, where my husband works. There's no way we can make that work. So I deleted the advertisement. My husband, who is full-time active, he sent it to me and said, "Did you see this?" I said, "Yeah, but honey, there's no way this is going to work. We can't make that. I would love that. Yes, it's my dream job and it's open and I should apply for it, but I can't." And he told me to apply for it and that we would make it work if I got selected. But if anything, I should at least have the option to take it or not. So I applied and interviewed and was selected from Eastern Europe. I actually did my interview over there and came back, had about 2 weeks after I got home from deployment, and moved 2 hours away, and now I have an apartment over here that I'm at Monday through Friday, and then I go home on the weekends. So it was I didn't get to do much of a transition back from deployment, but I was so excited to take this job that I was fine with that. I love it here.
What and you have the support of your husband who, like, you, like,
Yes.
deleted it, and then he was like, "No, this is your dream
Yep.
job. I wanna support you." So I think
Yeah.
that's you have to have that support to do things that, affect the whole family, and so that's amazing.
Yeah, he is my rock star. I know that sounds so cliche and blech, but my husband is sincerely my biggest cheerleader, has been since the day we met. I mean, he took on my daughter, as my baggage, if you will, from back when we first met, and he was like all in and has been all in ever since on everything we do. So I'm
That's so
super proud
awesome.
of him, and we're kind of breaking that typical dual mill type, I don't know, stereotype, I guess, but he really does and has always put my career first, especially over the last few years. So it's helpful.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah,
awesome. I think dual military I mean, I was dual military, so I know the challenges with it, but, it is hard, and I think that there is, like, a shift of not looking at, like, the guy as the person, and now it's like, well, who has the better, opportunities or whose career instead of focusing just on the male service member and having the wife just, like, follow their career, and so I think that's been really cool to see that there's kind of been a shift in that way people look at it, and it's yeah. I'm glad I
yeah.
got out, though. I'm not my husband's still in, and I'm like, I'm glad I'm the one who got out.
I
You know?
feel that.
It all worked out. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so you're doing ROTC, and one of the cool things on X is that you're, like, talking about, like, things that you're diving into and, like, the stories that you're sharing. So, what has it been like? Is it the dream job that you were hoping for? Do you love it?
It is s I am not even kidding when I say, Amanda, this is beyond the dream job. Like, it is so much fun. It is, and I think I speak, for myself in my position. I know that not all programs are the same, but I have an incredible boss who's very family first, sends me home on Thursdays so that I can get an extra day with my family, is just very hands off, lets me run. I teach both the freshmen and the sophomores, and I run PT because we're a little short staffed right now. But I absolutely love what I'm doing. It actually, while I've been here, my time here, it's developed this huge passion for higher education and just teaching in general. So now I'm actually getting my master's in higher education, which is awesome. I never ever thought that I would have any interest in the college or university industry whatsoever. And now it's like I see a whole future for myself, where 2 years ago, this was just going to be a job that I knew I was going to enjoy, but now I truly look forward to coming to work every single day at 5:30. I don't mind leaving at 7, 8 o'clock at night. It's just, yeah, the cadets are the energy that I so needed in my last positions, because I've gone from so many people that want to get out of the military. They're counting down to ETS. They're jaded. They're salty. There's of course still soldiers that love what they're doing, but in command, my closest people were senior NCOs that were just kind of at their limit. They were done. Plus, you throw a deployment on top of that. People just are over it by the end of it. And I'm a very high energy, enthusiastic, still love the military, love what I'm doing, love what it's done for my family. And I'm teaching people who still want to be part of that and are like looking forward to wearing the uniform and looking forward to being in those positions. So it's just oh man, I can't, there's no way to describe it. I love what I do. I absolutely love everything about it, even the hard days. But there's so much more
Yeah.
than just teaching them. Like, I'm also a counselor. I'm a life coach. I'm talking to a couple of my freshmen about, how do I break up with this person? How do I not settle? How do I handle this personal conflict? Should I join a fraternity? Should I do this? My parents don't support this. What do I do? I'm a tutor for certain academic things. Like, there's so much involved with it that it's exhausting and it's so rewarding at the same time. So I love it. I love this. It's so much more than the dream that I thought it was going to be.
That's awesome, and you seem like the perfect person because you care so much about the cadets, and
Yeah.
I know, like, I went through ROTC, the cadre was so important and instrumental in, like, helping direct where we ended up and, the support that they gave us and, it was just so important to have good leaders in ROTC positions because it helps, set you up for success for the military, and so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're in and you're a leader, in command or a platoon leader, like you're responsible for the lives and well-being of the people, your subordinates, right? You're responsible for that team. I think in ROTC, realizing that you're also responsible for these college students' futures. Like you could be, I think back and why it was such a dream for me, like you could be the person that sets them up for success or changes the trajectory that they're on if they're, in a position like I was. Like if I hadn't had that one recruiting officer really kind of put her own head out there and really try to help me, I would have ended up in thousands upon thousands of dollars of debt. I would have lost my scholarship, wouldn't have commissioned, probably wouldn't have finished my degree, and be a single mom who knows where at this point. So I think just you need to have people that are in those positions that believe in truly bettering the organization. Like you are fostering the next generation of this military. So why not put your all into it and truly love what you're doing, because they're going to take that with them into their next position, their next assignment. So yeah, I love it.
And you're even, like, looking at the curriculum and changing I saw you were changing, like, the slides to add, like, women,
Yep.
and I think that's so important and something that I didn't even realize when I was going through ROTC how, because 'cause I'm sure it was like that because that was a long time ago, um, and so, like, changing those words and, like, talking about women and, just allowing women to see themselves as leaders, I think is so important, and so I think that is really interesting that even today I think that was your thing, you're like, "Even today, I'm having to change the words and add women into the curriculum." So what has that been like?
That's been a little bit of there are days where it's frustrating, but there's also, a mindset shift where I don't think it's malicious. There was a point, and I think one of your other guests had kind of talked about this too, of I spent the first part of my career trying to prove everybody wrong, realizing I was never going to have a conversation with those people to say, okay, now look at me and tell me I did a good job. Like there was no winning that battle in my head of I'm proving you wrong. And then it became, okay, I'm just going to prove myself wrong. And now it's no, I'm going to prove myself right, that I do know this. I'm getting through the imposter syndrome. I do know the right thing to do. And I don't think that the mistakes that I see are malicious. I think in today's day and age, as women, we're surrounded by non-gender neutral verbiage. We're surrounded by still a lot of hatred or not super nice, great things about women in the military. We still have obstacles put up for us. I think, how do I word it the right way? We have been conditioned to think that it's out to get us, that these organizations are out to get us or make us feel inferior. And I think when you shift your mindset of, no, I just don't think people have thought about this. So let me be the one to just say, hey, let's fix this in a more tactful and like just in a way that actually gets people's attention of going, oh, yeah, I could be wrong, instead of aggressively being like, what the heck? Why does this still say this? Just, oh,
Right.
hey, let's fix this. So I'm going to do it. And then hopefully other people follow suit at some point. So it's been a little bit of a learning process over the last 2 years of just understanding that, okay, this is not out to make women feel inferior. It's just how it's always been. So now how can I teach these cadets to be like, hey, no, the future is going to look different and the present looks different. So let's just make it the habit. So it's not so mind blowing that we're changing slides to say his and her team instead of just his
Right.
team. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's been the process.
I I agree with that because it isn't I mean, a lot of it is just the slides that have come before and, just no one ever bothered to update them. And
Yeah.
I used to get really, like, angry and frustrated when I had to, like, prove that I was a woman veteran and that, like, I served in the military, and now I kind of, like, have flipped it. It's like, "Okay, this is an opportunity to educate someone. They don't know. I don't need to get mad at them just because they don't know.
Yeah.
I just have the opportunity to share my story and, like, change their perspective instead of being like, I can't believe you didn't know. It's more like, oh, let me tell you about my story. And so that you do know, because just getting angry, that they don't hear my story. They just see an angry person, and that doesn't
Yeah.
help change the narrative. So I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell my cadets I have a few different catchphrases, and one of them is, "You don't know what you don't know." And I'm going to give that benefit of the doubt. But once you do know, then we're going to have a conversation if you continue doing, what we just talked about. But I realize that my sanity and my inner peace is so much calmer going into things, just assuming that person didn't know. I'm going to tactfully and gently, like I do, gently correct people like, hey, maybe let's think about this. And 9 times out of 10, that's going to work so much better than just aggressively confronting it. Because the truth is, like, people don't know what they don't know. But once you do, then there's no excuse. At that point, then there's no excuse. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been such a great interview. I really enjoyed getting to know you and learning a little bit more about who I'm following on Twitter. So that's really fun.
It's me.
So I always like to end the interview with, what advice would you give to a young woman who's considering joining the military?
Oh my gosh. Biggest piece of advice, I think, is, the cliche, you can do it. Like, you can. There's going to be days where you're going to tell yourself that you can't, but things are designed to make you fail. Things are going to happen. We find our most growth in failure. We find our knowledge in failure. We learn the most from failing. Don't avoid things just to avoid failing. Like I tell my daughter, don't avoid things that might make you uncomfortable if it's going to steal your joy. Like if there's joy at the end of it, or pride in serving, or, pride in yourself and being able to do something, don't avoid the first step just because you think you might fail. And you'll probably fail, but it's not about the failure. It's about how you bounce back from that, because that's where you're going to really shine and really find that self-confidence that you need. So that's my thing. Not even just for the military, life in general. Don't avoid things and steal yourself of joy just because of the discomfort that you might experience in the moment.
I think that's great advice. I really like the quote by Joseph Campbell, "If you come to a great chasm in life, jump, it's not that far," because I used that through my deployment, because I was so afraid, and I was like, okay, just jump. And it just got me through. And I still use it today, because there's still things in my life that I don't really want to do. And I just have to remember that it's not as far as I think. And I like that you said you might fail, but that's okay. You'll learn from it and you'll grow, and then you'll do better the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% the truth. And Lord, that is my entire career in a nutshell, is a whole lot of failures, but I think I am who I am, and I'm going to fail tomorrow, and I'm going to fail next week and next year, and I'm still going to be a better version of myself at the backside of it. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest. I'm really glad we got to do this interview. So,
Me too.
thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.